Hello, here we are. It's Saturday afternoon instead of Thursday evening. Facebook rolled out some kind of update to their live thing, and of course, it wasn't working on my computer. Today, they finally went back and allowed us to use the classic mode. So I thought I'd go ahead and do this. I'm sure everybody was just dying for it, right? Um, Today, I'm going to read a story called Particles. This is another really old one. I'm going to read it out of the original edition of Darkscapes, which came out in like 2001. I don't know. It was the Publish America scam, but we won't talk about that. According to my misspelled foreword in here, the story Particles was originally published in a magazine called Infernal in 2001. I can't find a print copy of Infernal anywhere in my office, so I'm assuming that was probably an early webzine. I don't know. But yeah, it was published in 2001. It says before that it was a draft for like 12 years. And I do remember pulling out the old typewriter manuscript that I had marks on from editing and retyping that into my first computer. That was quite a machine there. 20 megabyte hard drive, if you can imagine. Yeah. Anyway, the story Particles is about a little Oklahoma town, like so many of my stories are. And this one is it's built around a lake that people come to fish, and that is their main source of employment. And the lake has been dying, and this is how the people come together to fix that problem. So here we go. Particles. The town of Buzzard, Oklahoma was dead. Once it had been a contented little village beside a moderate-sized lake, renowned for its population of big-mouth bass and crappie. People came from as far away as Virginia and Wyoming to fish in Buzzard Lake. The town sustained itself on tourist dollars. Then the lake died. The town soon followed, and, like fleas leaving the cooling corpse of a dead dog, those residents with means left Buzzard to its decay. Missy Goldblum remembered the day the lake died. She had been 6 years old and one of the people who went to the beach early that July morning. She went to the beach early every day she was not in school, looking for objects left behind by fishermen and sunbathers. That day, the beaches had been covered in dead fish. By 10 a.m., the fish were baking in the summer sun, filling the town with the rotten stench of watery death. Fishermen reported that there didn't seem to be a single fish left alive in the lake. Nothing was taking the bait they threw into the water. That was 2 years ago. The dead fish were gone, but Missy knew the lake was still dead. It was truly a body of water, she often thought. Still, every morning when she did not have to go to school, Missy went to the lake and roamed the deserted beaches. Even sunbathers did not come to Buzzard Lake anymore. Usually nobody came but Missy. That's why she was first to find the dead heart of the lake. She left the crumbling blacktop road that led from the town to the lake and pushed her way through the trees and weeds toward the beach. When she stepped out of the brush and faced the lake, she saw the thing resting in the sand. The object was roughly 100 feet long and about half that wide across its middle. It was about 10 feet tall at its highest point, tapering toward the ends. The thing was gray-black in color with patches of thick, liquid-looking black. As Missy watched, one of the smaller wet black spots shrank, hardened, and began to turn gray. Missy walked around the thing to stand between it and the lake. It reminded her suddenly of a giant slug. The sand of the beach was packed smooth where the thing had come out of the water. Missy reached out and touched the side of the mass. The gray-black matter crumbled like dust beneath her fingers, floating in the still air. She breathed some of it, and her asthma immediately kicked in, making her hitch and wheeze. Frantically, Missy shoved a hand into the pocket of her jeans and pulled out her yellow inhaler. She took a puff of the medicine, remembering her mother telling her to use it sparingly because she couldn't have another one until the first of the month. Missy thought about touching one of the darker, wetter spots, but decided they just looked too slimy. She backed away from the thing and stepped into the water. She quickly jumped out and turned to look at the lake. She could remember how the water used to be clear at the shore, growing to a blue-green as the lake deepened, the waves sparkling in the sunlight. Now the water seemed thicker, blacker. Even on an August afternoon, the water remained deathly cold, and it took a good stiff breeze to produce even the slightest waves on the water's surface. A stone tossed into the water vanished with merely a sound or splash, swallowed forever. Missy looked back to the monstrous thing the lake had vomited onto the beach. She walked around it again, noting that most of the wet-looking places had dried up. She started back for the road, back to town to tell her father. She passed bait shops and gas stations that had been closed for a long time, their windows boarded over, the boards bearing messages from teenagers who were angry about living in the dead town. Missy began to run as she neared the convenience store, the first business establishment that was still open. A few men sat outside the store sipping beer from brown bottles. She felt their eyes on her but ignored them. A black cat jumped out of a trash dumpster and ran past her as Missy reached the post office. She tripped and fell. An older man with long, greasy brown hair cackled and pointed from his place on the post office steps. Missy got up, brushed off her clothes, and continued up Main Street. She turned off Main and walked past houses with chipped and fading paint, some with half-dressed, dirty children playing in yards that were lucky if they were dotted with a few green weeds. At her own home, Missy jumped over the missing steps of her front porch with a sagging roof. The wooden screen door slammed behind her as she went into the house. "Missy, is that you?" her mother called from the kitchen. "Yes," Missy answered. Another asthma attack was squeezing gently at her chest, but she fought off the urge to use her inhaler. She took deep breaths, in through her nose, out through her mouth, and the wheeze faded slowly from her breathing. "Are you okay?" Her mother had come to the doorway between the kitchen and living room, a half-peeled potato in one hand. Her red and white striped maternity blouse was stretched tight over her belly. "Yes," Missy said. "Where's Dad? There's something on the beach." "He's out back." Missy found her father in his workshed. He was painting a flower pot. Once his decorated pots had been just a hobby. Now painting them and carrying them to various flea markets was his way of supplementing the checks the state sent to help provide for his family. Missy watched as he carefully finished the curve of a vibrant green leaf on a rose stem. "Dad?" He gently put the flower pot down and turned to her, reaching out a hand and gathering her into his lap. "What do you need, Muffin?" he asked. His tired eyes and unshaved cheeks made him look 20 years older than his real age of 31. "I found something on the beach," Missy said. "Something weird." "What is it?" "I don't know," she said. "It looks like a giant slug or maybe a huge liver. It's great big and gray, but I think it used to be black because there's black spots on it. Those are shrinking away, though. When you touch it, it crumbles like ashes in a fireplace." "How big is this thing?" "I don't know. About as big as 2 school buses, I guess." "Now, Muffin, where do you think something like that would come from?" His sad, smiling eyes said he didn't believe her. "I think maybe you've been watching too much TV or reading too many scary books. Why don't you go help your mom clean the house?" "But, Dad, there's really something there. Won't you come look at it, please?" He sighed and glanced back at his flower pot. "There's really something there?" he asked. He sounded hopeful. Missy nodded, and he nodded in return. "Let's go," he said. "We'll take the car." They parked the smoking, coughing Pontiac in the lot near a boat ramp and walked through the woods to the beach. Fred Goldblum let out a low, slow whistle when he saw the thing laying on the sand under the noon sun. "I'll be damned," he said. Together they walked around the mass. Missy noticed that the black splotches had completely disappeared. Her father carefully touched the surface, causing a chunk of the thing to fall off. It exploded into a cloud of dust when it hit the ground. Missy and her father both began sneezing. Missy pulled her inhaler from her pocket and had to take 2 deep puffs to get her breathing under control. "What do you think it is, Dad?" she asked when she was able to get her breath. "I don't know, Muffin, but we better get you away from it. You'll use up all your inhaler if any more of that thing falls off." They started back toward the car. "I'm going to take you home, then I'll go by the police station and tell Chief Payne. He'll probably have to call in some state people." "Do you think that thing is what killed all the fish?" Missy asked. "I don't know, Muffin. I don't know. Maybe." Missy's asthma had returned with a vengeance before they got back to the house. She hurried inside, pulling her inhaler from her pocket as her father gunned the little Pontiac back toward Main Street. The inhaler did a little good. Missy couldn't help her mother with the housework. Any exertion left her gasping for air. "Why don't you go lie down?" her mother suggested. Missy went to her bedroom but couldn't lie still. The inability to draw breath caused her to thrash and roll on her bed. Her mother came to the door and leaned against the frame for a moment, a worried look on her face. She went to Missy's closet. Okay, honey, I'll get the oxygen, Laura Goldblum said. She pulled out a large green cylinder on a wheeled cart and pushed it to the head of Missy's bed. Hold still. She put the clear plastic cup over her daughter's mouth and nose, then turned the valve on the oxygen tank. Okay, Missy, breathe deep. Missy did. After a few deep breaths, she felt her airways relaxing somewhat. Laura turned down the valve on the tank. Thanks, Mom, Missy said, her voice muffled by the mask. She knew the oxygen was expensive. She took the mask off. I'll be okay now. You sure? Missy nodded and watched as her mother closed the valve on the tank. It makes me tired. Can I go to sleep? Yes, for a while, Laura said. Missy woke up an hour later, her mother shaking her gently. Missy, I'm going to the lake with your dad. We're going to look at the thing you found. Everyone's going. Do you want to come? Missy thought about it for a moment. She knew she'd be treated special because she found the thing first, but the thought of how the dust from the object affected her asthma decided her. No, she said, shaking her head. It hurts me to breathe around it. I'll stay here. Her parents had been gone for about 45 minutes when Missy heard the wind pick up outside. It began to howl suddenly. She knew from the smell that came in through the open windows that the wind was blowing over the dead lake. She decided the heat would be better than the smell, so she went through the house and closed all the windows. A few minutes later, and her neighbors began returning home. Some walked, others came in old cars. All of them were sneezing and holding hands over their faces. When Fred and Laura Goldblum came home, they were also sneezing. By that time, Missy was back in bed, her oxygen mask over her face. The tank's valve cracked just a little as she drew greedily at the gas. What happened? She asked through the mask when her parents came into her room. They were both wiping at their eyes and noses. The damn wind came up and started blowing that thing apart, Fred said. It's blowing all that dust, or ash or whatever the thing was made of, right into town. He stopped, looked at his daughter's heaving chest and at the green tank. You going to be okay, Muffin? Missy nodded. She breathed deeply, wishing she could turn up the amount of oxygen she was getting, but not daring to use so much. Hours crept by. Despite the closed windows, the dust blowing through the town crept into the houses. Laura and Fred continued sneezing and wiping their eyes and noses. Missy kept her oxygen mask clapped firmly over her face. There was no sound except the wind outside, no children playing, no cars moving on the street. Night came. Sometime during the darkest part of the night, the wind died as suddenly as it had sprung to life. About an hour later, Missy was jerked out of a light sleep by the screaming of her father. Laura! Laura! He called. Come here! He was in the bathroom. Missy heard her mother run from the bedroom to the bathroom. She heard her mother gasp. What is that? Laura asked. I don't know what the hell it is, Fred answered, his voice shrill. Laura screamed suddenly. It's on me, too! It's on me! Oh, my God! Fred shouted. Missy! Laura yelled. They both hurried to their daughter's room, flicking on the light and blinding Missy in the sudden glare. Before Missy could ask what was happening, her parents had stripped the blankets off her and were pulling at her pajamas. Then Missy saw that the left side of her father's abdomen was a mass of dark green gelatin, so green it was almost black. He was only wearing his briefs. The rest of his skin was shiny with perspiration. Missy turned her wide eyes to her mother and saw that Laura had a similar growth spreading from her right armpit and disappearing beneath her nightgown. What? She pointed. I don't know, Fred snapped. Do you have any of it on you? Missy helped them tear off her pajamas until she sat before them in nothing but her thin underwear. She didn't have any patches of the jelly-like substance growing on her. You can't wipe it off? She asked. Fred shook his head. Missy saw that the stuff had spread up her father's side to his armpit and the underside of his arm. It looks like the wet patches I saw on that thing by the lake before it dried up, Missy said. Her parents looked at her, their eyes large and scared, but before they could speak, a woman screamed outside. Fred and Laura started for the front door. Their movement stirred up the dust in the room, triggering Missy's asthma. She retreated to her oxygen mask. A few minutes later, Laura returned. That was Dawn Warren. She has it too. So do her kids, Laura said. She sighed. I feel so tired. She got up and moved away, back toward her bedroom. Missy could see that the gelatin had spread up her mother's shoulder blade to the nape of her neck. Missy hunched under her thin sheet, listening to the voices in the night. People were screaming and wailing all around the house. Her father returned. She saw him for a moment. He had put on a robe, but she could see that his chest and the insides of his thighs had turned to jelly. He went to his bed and was quiet. Morning came silently. Missy slipped out of her bed and crept toward her parents' bedroom. She stopped in the doorway, her hands clamped over her face. Her mother and father were gone, replaced by one pulsing mass of green-black gelatin that lay on the bed in the shape of a man and woman snuggled together, a large lump protruding in the front of what would have been the pregnant woman. Missy ran back to her room and hid under the bed. Soon she heard squishy noises coming from her parents' bedroom. She peeked from under the bed and saw that the thing that had been her mother and father lurched past her bedroom toward the front door. The screen door slammed behind it. The porch creaked under its weight. Missy scooted from her hiding place and went to the living room window. The thing was joined in the street by her neighbors, all of whom had also become walking blobs of deep green gelatin. They shuffled along the street, all headed toward Main Street, where they turned and directed their steps for Buzzard Lake. Missy saw two of the figures bump into one another. They stuck together, melded into one another and becoming one larger, lumbering mass. She sank down to the floor. She sat there for a long time. Finally, she climbed to her feet and looked out the window again. There was nothing moving outside. Missy put on her clothes and left the house, moving slowly toward the lake. The weeds and trees between the road and the lake were flattened. Streaks of blackish goo showed that the residents of Buzzard had joined to form one huge mass and had simply crushed anything that came between them, it, and the water. Missy followed the trail to the edge of the lake. The dead thing she had found the day before was gone without a trace. Water lapped the sand like gentle laughter. Missy looked down into the clear fluid and let her gaze travel outward toward the center of the lake, where the water deepened and turned dark green. She felt tears on her face. She thought of the flower pot her father had been working on and how it would never be finished now. She thought of the baby brother or sister she would never know and how she would never get to make pancakes with her mom again. She turned around and went home. Missy returned to the beach every day, hoping the lake would give her parents back to her. She knew it was a foolish hope. There was never any sign of other people. She ate all the food in her house, then timidly entered the town's only grocery store. There was no one in the store. She took only what she needed and hurried home. A week after the people of Buzzard disappeared, a pickup stopped on the road near where the trees and brush had been flattened. Missy was sitting on the beach. She stood up and turned to watch the uniformed man walk toward her from the pickup. The man looked at the broken trees with great interest. He stopped beside her. "What happened here?" he asked. "I don't know," Missy answered. "Why is there no one in town?" Missy only looked at him. She was young, but she knew enough to know the man wouldn't believe her if she told him the truth. A patch on the man's shirt said he worked for the state wildlife department. "Everyone just left," Missy said. "Even your folks?" Missy nodded. "Why didn't you go with them?" "I have asthma," she said. "I was breathing from an oxygen tank, so I couldn't go." The man's face crinkled, and Missy knew she had probably said too much. "They just left?" he asked. "You don't know where they went? When did they leave?" "I talked to the police chief last week. Excuse me. He said something had washed up out of the lake." "It's gone now," Missy said. The man started to say something else, but was interrupted by a loud splash. Missy looked out over the lake just in time to see a young bass flop back into the water. "I'll be dog," the man said. "It looks like this old lake might be coming back to life." That is it. That's Particles, written a long time ago. I can tell you just from rereading it that at the time I was still very much reading Stephen King fiction and watching, old sci-fi horror movies like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, things like that. So yeah, that was it. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for tuning in, and I guess I'll see you next week. Bye.